Today we're talking to Jessy J. It's album release day for Terranova. Well, first off, how's album release day going for you?
It's going well so far. Yeah, I'm very excited about this project. It's my 10th studio album, so a lot of hard work gone into it, a lot of love, and some amazing musicians on this project as well.
Let's start with the genesis of the concept, and you've talked in some other interviews about kind of going back to who you worked with in the past. You explained it all. How did you decide on this particular set of songs and collaborations?
Well, I really wanted to team up again with producer Paul Brown. That's how I started off my career with my very first album, Tequila Moon. We worked together on that project, and I thought it would be a perfect way to bring everything back together. And it was amazing working with him again in the studio. We kept in touch throughout the years, and it was amazing working also with the musicians that we hired for this project, people like David Garfield, Brian Bromberg, Shane Carrio, Rashida Hate Garcia, and many more. It was just what I always wanted for my 10th studio project.
There are a mix of originals and covers. What in particular drew you to those covers for this album? Why would they fit with the overall arc, I should say, of Terranova?
Well, coming into this project, I knew I wanted it to be a sister album to Tequila Moon, which meant a similar feel, which is back to the Latin jazz roots, and also the contemporary jazz elements with modern sounds. So that kind of brought it to a particular circle of songs. And then from there, I was really open-minded when it came to the covers. I was working with Paul Brown in the studio, and he said, "What do you think about doing a Mr. Magic?" And I thought, wow, I do that show. In my show, I do that song. And it's a wonderful song. I love Grover Washington Jr., and it's just such a fun song to play on the tenor saxophone especially. So it worked out perfect for my album. And then I suggested recording Piel Canela, which is a cover from Edie Gourmet and Trio Los Panchos from the 1950s. It's a family favorite song, and I always loved the lyrics. I thought they were so catchy, and the hook, the chorus and everything. And I thought, well, I've never heard an instrumental version of this, but I knew it would be beautiful. So we worked on that together in the studio. And then the other cover song we did, No More Blues by Jobim. I've always been fascinated by Brazilian jazz. I love the harmonies, the rhythms, and that's a favorite of mine that I had been listening to since forever. And I suggested we record that song similar to the way that we recorded Mashkinada on my first album, Tequila Moon. We did a Sergio Mendes song. And so, I wanted to keep it similar, because also on Tequila Moon, we did Poetry Man. We did a couple of covers like Songs for You. And, and there was another song that was almost like the Tequila Moon album. On Tequila Moon, we recorded a song called PB&J, which makes reference to Paul Brown and Jessy J. And I was doing another acoustic song like that, acoustic guitar and saxophone, really broken down. And we ended up calling it Fresh because it was something new and something fresh. And it even starts off with the same bell tones that you hear at the beginning of PB&J in Fresh. So almost song by song, if you go through, there's so many similarities, and musically and also in reference to just the whole sound of the album. It sounds a lot like Tequila Moon.
How would you describe the difference both in your collaboration with Paul and also in your general approach to performance? Obviously you've grown, as any artist ideally should, over the course of nearly 2 decades. But the process of putting together Tequila Moon, fast forward from 2008 up to 2025 in Terranova, what are the differences in those two elements of collaboration and performance?
Well, from a performance standpoint, I do feel a lot more experience under my belt in the past, like you said, 2 decades, a lot more live experience, studio experience. I remember being a little bit nervous when I was recording Tequila Moon because it was my first project with a major label, which was Concord Records. So I felt a lot of pressure at that time, and now I don't have pressure because I'm an established artist. I have a track record and a fan base, etc. And there was just not as many unknowns. I knew exactly what to expect when I went into the studio, where to stand, and in relationship to the microphone, a lot of the things that you're still figuring out on the first album, it was just a lot easier going through to this album. Everything was pretty much like I knew exactly what to do.
I noticed on this album that the East Coast songs and the LA songs they're kind of arranged a certain way. Was that intentional to put? And I'm referring to the East Coast vibe artists and the classic LA sound artists as the press release says, and then comparing that over. How was the arrangement of the songs ultimately decided? Was that an element? How did you decide to go tracks 1 through? Well, there was of course a remix and the bonus track at the end, but how did you decide to lay those all out?
Well, there is a different sound quality, I think, in the tracks that you mentioned, the East Coast and the West Coast. So the West Coast sound was the ones that we recorded live in the studio. They were free-flowing, and the arrangements were sometimes made on the spot. For example, No More Blues, I basically just sat down at the piano and I said, let's try this for an intro. And it became the intro for that song. And in other songs like Yo Canela, we were debating how many times to go through the solo section, when to go back to the chorus, how to add the interlude. A lot of things were decided on the spot. And that's the beauty of when we are all together in the same room. So the West Coast classic sound had that laid-back feel, a little bit more spontaneity when recording, as opposed to the East Coast sound. Since I wasn't in the same room with the East Coast musicians, they recorded their tracks, sent them to me, and I recorded my tracks together with Paul Brown. So you can tell a little bit of a difference of the tightness of the arrangement. It was pretty much already set. We could move some things around, but it wasn't like we were in the studio all collaborating at the same time. It was more of an email exchange, a file sharing experience. So I think you hear that a little bit more in the music as well.
And I perked up when I see classic LA sound, and me being working at a pop music radio station. We play plenty of the songs that either going back to the first wave of like pop music, LA session musicians, so we're talking the Wrecking Crew, or then the second wave. I know it's got the label yacht rock, but we're talking all the session musicians, the Paches and the Lucathurs of the world, all the studio cats from the 70s and 80s, the Quincy Jones era. Granted, like I said, it's pop and rock, but of course there was elements of jazz in that tying around. Do you find how you see that in like the smooth jazz world and the connections, the Latin jazz world? Does that tie in with that LA sound?
It really is. I think it started back when Miles Davis recorded Kind of Blue and Chet Faker was doing his West Coast sound. I feel like, all of the West Coast musicians stayed and lived in LA. They were at the beach. You got the sun, you got the breezy weather, versus the East Coast, it's colder. There's a little bit more energy of like, we got to get this done, a little more urgency behind the music. Perhaps, there's more straight-ahead jazz in New York than there is here in LA. But I feel that there is that classic recording sound that goes with jazz as well. You mentioned Quincy Jones, a lot of the session players here that do movie scores and they do TV and film, cartoons, stuff like that. It's a very tight group of people that do a lot of the same session work. And it just reminds me of like Indiana Jones or Star Wars, things like that, that John Williams sound. It's like orchestral and pop. But pretty much the session musicians out here do a little bit of everything. So, but like Brian Bromberg is a classic example. He works with David Foster. He does a ton of studio work, film, TV. I also do TV and film here in Los Angeles. So when it comes to the LA sound, you know what you're going to get. It's a little bit of a tightness and very, very meticulous when it comes to intonation, pitch, articulation. We're just kind of trained to all play in the same way.
What in particular drew you to perform live Mr. Magic, and what is your favorite part of, or aspect, I should say, of the essence of Grover Washington Jr.?
I love the way he developed his solos. They were just telling a story. And I feel like jazz is all about feelings, telling a story, explaining what you're going through. And that particular song just grabbed my attention early on. When I first heard it, I just thought, wow, this song, you can tell that there's a melody and there's a hook, but it's mainly all solos. And the percussionist is right there in the middle of it because it was composed by two people, one of which was a Caribbean percussionist. So that also might explain why I'm drawn to it, because I love percussion, being from Latin American heritage as well. So I like the world element of that song, the driving force of the tenor saxophone, and just the way that it grows and grows and grows, but yet the drum beat stays exactly the same. So I think that was the very beginning of what we would call contemporary jazz. It was totally different than everything else at that time.
I sometimes will ask artists what's their favorite song in the album, which sometimes is like, I can't answer that because they're all their favorites, they're all their babies, if you will. But I'm going to go a little bit of a different approach here, especially with the musicianship. What is your favorite performance on the album, whether it's a performance of yours or a performance with one of the other musicians?
Oh, great question. Well, I would have to say Mr. Magic was my favorite performance because I just felt like I caught a wave when I was recording it, and that's pretty much just one take. Sat down, did my song, did the solo, and that was it. There was not much more to be done because with a song like that, it's all about the vibe. And people have always said, you sound like Grover. Every now and again, people will say that to me at a concert, at a recording. And I do feel like I could be like his little sister or something. I understand where he's coming from. He was a straight-ahead player. He was a session musician. He played all the saxophones, alto, tenor, bass, soprano. And I just get it. I feel like I understand him in a way. The way that he plays is just so crystal clear to me.
You do the vocal version of No More Blues. There's the instrumental version of No More Blues. Why both on this album?
I originally recorded it only as a vocal. And in talking to Paul Brown, we kept thinking, man, this would also be good instrumental. And at the very last second, after the whole album was already mastered and mixed, I decided to do the instrumental version just to see. And it ended up sounding great, so we added it as a bonus track. And it's a really fun song to play also on the saxophone. But I like the words. To me, singing that song, it really brings me back to my own life, wanting to settle down, have a home, not travel as much. I can relate to the words of this song, and that's another reason that I wanted to record it.
You've been fairly prolific with a lot of projects coming out of late. Even the kids one, which I perked up immediately because I got a 4-year-old at home, just turned 4. So I went, ooh, maybe I need to give this one a listen to as well. I'm trying to expose her to all sorts of different genres of music and let her figure out what she ultimately likes. What would be the next, I guess, genre that you'd like to tap into at this point?
Okay. Well, I would love to do a straight-ahead album. I have not done it, but I do love straight-ahead jazz, and I was primarily a straight-ahead jazz musician before I delved into the contemporary jazz world. So, my degree is in jazz studies from USC. It was all straight-ahead, and a lot of that comes out in my playing, especially in my live performances. On the recorded versions, there's some interplay, but because the songs are limited to a certain amount of minutes, it's not like the straight-ahead world where you can just jam on one song for 12 minutes. Mm-hmm. But I would love to record a straight-ahead album. And going back to your comment about the children's album, yes, I did record a children's album last year, released on Mother's Day. And it was a great joy for me to do that because I have 2 young boys, a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. And the songs were inspired by them, their daily routines, things they like to do, and songs that I started singing for them. And I decided to record it. And it was a really fun project to work on. I didn't play saxophone. I played the piano and the flute.
I'm looking at it right now, my Spotify rundown, and I'm definitely going to end up playing it in the background at some point at home, at some point in the coming days, for sure, now that I've discovered this in my prep and learning about this. So thank you for doing that, for sure. On the topic of jazz, and again, the more straight ahead versus smooth, however one wants to put that, What is the most challenging jazz piece? And I know that's a wide open question because there's so many approaches one can take to any given piece. But which one in your career have you found okay, I love to dive into it. I love to tackle this. It's Not necessarily difficult, but you know you've done something when you performed it. If you feel like you've successfully performed that particular jazz piece, what would that be?
I think the iconic John Coltrane song called Giant Steps is always on the musician's practice list. It's just a song that you cannot master. The changes are so quick, and depending on the tempo that you play the song, and then you can change the key, play it in all 12 keys. I mean, that's the ultimate jazz standard, I think, Giant Steps.
Would you want to tackle that on an upcoming jazz album? Not to start setting here's a playlist, but what are some of the ones you'd most want to lay down in a recording of from whichever genres of jazz? I mean, there's bop, avant-garde, free jazz. There's all sorts, but which ones jump out at you I'd really like to go after this one?
Well, it would still have to have a groove on it. So even if I did Giant Steps, it would be a totally different version from the John Coltrane version. But honestly, I'm leaning more towards doing a Cannibal Adderley, Nat Adderley type of collaboration, something more along those lines for straight ahead jazz, is a groovy, funky, with changes version.
In the world of smooth jazz, as I'm listening to this, when I was a kid, I'm a hardcore weather geek, so I watched the Weather Channel all the time when I could. And this is back when, I don't know if you remember, but they would have a lot of smooth jazz played during the local on the 8s, the local forecasts would play all the time. And as I'm listening to this threw me back to the early 1990s when this sort of music, like the Rippingtons, for example, David Benoit, would be played all the time on there. And I loved watching that. I was exposed to a lot of smooth jazz that way. You performing as much in the genre, who would you say are not necessarily the best, but maybe you want to go there? Who are your favorites, or who are the prime examples of the best, broadly speaking, smooth jazz artists?
Well, people that I really admire in the genre would be people like Jeff Lorber, someone that does a little bit of everything as a composer, producer, arranger. I mean, he started off with his own Jeff Lorber fusion group, and then he's just evolved with the industry for 40 years, maybe. So I kind of base my career on a trajectory like that. We start off a certain way, you keep going, and you keep playing forever, and you keep changing. Another artist that I really love is Joe Sample. He was a mentor of mine, and we recorded 2 songs together on my Hot Sauce album, and I loved his playing because he could jump between straight ahead, contemporary, smooth. He did it all, and his music was really based on just the groove as well, and feeling, emotion, and so much spontaneity in the studio. Yeah, he's just everything that I want to be.
So who would you most like to have for a collaboration on any future project, whatever you want? Is there someone or several potentially at the top of your list?
That's a great question. I've worked with a lot of amazing artists. I've mentioned Joe Sample, Ray Parker. I've worked with also Jeff Lorber, Jimmy Haslip, Norman Brown, Paul Brown. I feel like I've already kind of reached the peak of who I want to record with on an album. Now it's more just experiencing life, and seeing what else is out there. I would definitely love to collaborate with Carlos Santana one day.
And he just put out a new album, so he's still doing stuff, obviously. So there's hope for that. I would hope so anyway. Saxophone or phones, maybe plural, which ones did you play on this album? Was it one in particular, or for the particular types of ranges or whatnot? Which ones did you play on the recordings of Terranova?
For Terranova, I played my Selmer Super Action 80 Series 2 tenor saxophone, as well as my Selmer Mark 6 tenor saxophone. And then I didn't play any alto or baritone on this project, but I did play a flute on a few things and also sang on a song.
So how do you know which particular instrument to use on a given song or a different project?
I can just tell the tone of the 2 instruments are so different, and I rarely use my Mark 6. I reserve it for songs that need a smoky tenor tone, and I really like the way that it sounds on albums when I'm creating a sound from the 1960s because it's a 1960s horn. So I feel like it goes perfectly with that song.
Very good. So to wrap up, mention the deeper jazz project is potentially something coming up, but more short term. What's the plan? As of course now the album being out literally hours ago as we're talking. But what's the short term plan as we go through the rest of 2025? What are you looking forward to doing?
Oh, I'm so excited to promote this album all over the world. So I did have a pre-sales in London and also recently in Seal Beach, Daytona, Florida. And coming up, I'm going to have a virtual concert this month in April. And then I'm going to be heading over to Mexico for the Cancun Jazz Festival, South Carolina, lots of different places on my tour schedule this year. And I'll be promoting the album there. And basically just relaxing a little bit because, as you know, recording an album takes so much energy and work. So now I can kind of just sit back and just hang out for a couple months before I start my new project.
Well, it's a very good project, this one, Terranova. Jessy J, it was a pleasure to talk to you and to go through all sorts, kind of geek out on jazz stuff. I love doing that. So thank you for the opportunity and thank you for doing this project and all the best going forward.
Thank you so much, Luke. It was wonderful speaking with you. I hope you have a wonderful day.